Welcome to Clarity Matters. Communications has never had more data available to it, yet many teams still struggle to show the real impact of their work. The latest research from Gartner highlights the challenge. Nearly half of chief communications officers say they find it difficult to prove the value of communications, and more than a third say their teams are still seen as cost centers rather than value drivers. Part of the issue is investment. Communications currently spends just 2.9% of its budget on measurement and analytics, compared with 8% in marketing. But that's starting to change. By 2029, spending on data and analytics in communications is expected to double as companies demand faster decisions and clearer evidence of business impact. Reporting activity like reach, impressions, likes, outputs will no longer be enough. Leaders expect to see how communications drives behavior change, influences stakeholders, and contributes to real business outcomes. And the teams that can do that will earn far greater strategic influence. Which brings us to today's guest. I'm joined by Sam Knowles, a leading expert in data storytelling, host of the Data Malarkey podcast, and author of the Using Data Better Trilogy, Narrative by Numbers, How to Be Insightful, and Asking Smarter Questions. In this conversation, we'll explore where communications teams most often fall short when trying to prove behavioral impact, the capabilities communications teams need to build truly intelligence-driven functions, and what executive-ready evidence actually looks like, the kind that shapes decisions rather than simply informing them. Sam, welcome to Clarity Matters. It's fantastic to see you.
Thank you very much for having me, Louise. I'm really looking forward to talking.
We first met several years ago while working together on a project for a mutual client. And what struck me then is your ability to help organizations cut through data sprawl and overwhelm to use data smarter. So let's start there. When you look at communications teams today, where do you most often see the gap between reporting activity and proving behavior change? And how should leaders close it?
What a small question you start with, Liz. No, what a great question. So I think where's the gap? There's a confusion that I think there's a limiting false belief. I mean, not just in data storytelling, but in the use of data to motivate proper behavior change in all sorts of organizations. And that limiting false belief goes something like this. If only we had more data, better dashboards, or more sophisticated analytics, then we'd make better decisions. But I don't think that most organizations, I mean, even those like, I don't know, rare disease pharma, but I don't think most organizations lack for data. What they lack for is the clarity of asking what is the key business question, to ask genuinely smarter questions. I think there's one gap there. I don't think there's no data crisis in information, except for the surface of it. It's that we fail to ask the right questions. So I think confusing data for insight, taking a snapshot of a dashboard and saying, look at all these insights, and actually there's nothing there at all. But also I think there's insufficient understanding of how you bring about meaningful behavior change within an organization. So I think there's a as well as the false belief about more data, better dashboards, smarter analytics, there's a false belief that we only need to give people the information and they will change their behavior. This kind of psychology 101 will tell you that isn't how you motivate behavior change. You need information is invaluable, but motivation and giving people the behavioral skills to change. So if I ruled the world and I could help people to reorganize their comms team, I would say, understand the difference between data and insight, know how to get from data to insight, and then also invest time in understanding how you do go about changing behavior, how you do that. If you do that, you'll be singing happily.
We'll be skipping into the sunset. What do you, just to clarify for our listeners, what do you consider an insight to be?
I think that an insight is there are two parts, two elements to an insight. So it's very much more than a data point or a snapshot of a dashboard or a casual observation. That's what it isn't. My definition, my simple and straightforward definition of an insight is that it's a profound and useful understanding. It's profound because it answers the question, so what do the data mean? We've seen that people are talking about this issue in social media that appears to be contradicted by what analysts are writing about, but the market data points over here. So if you kind of triangulate multiple data sources, which increasingly we can do, but if you triangulate multiple data sources and you give a coherent understanding of what the data mean, you answer the so what question. That's the profound bit. The useful bit is that we're then able to answer the question, now what should we do as a result? So it's often multi-dimensional. Inevitably it involves some compromise because some signals may be contradicting others, but by answering so what and then allowing us to go on to now what, then we're in a great position. But that movement from data to insight can be difficult in some cultures. Some cultures are paralysis by overanalysis. Some big global corporates and also smaller organizations, but we'll just do one more side, just one more. And that sometimes kind of good enough has to be good enough, and learning when to jump and when you've got something. I don't think there's a universal way of expressing them, but I think you need to join data points together in them. And once you've got that understanding, which can seem remarkably obvious. I mean, in some insights feel like a statement of the bleeding obvious. It can't be this simple. Sometimes it is, but profound and useful. So what now what?
Lovely. Just going back to the Gartner research that I mentioned earlier. So the latest study confirms that nearly 50% of chief communications officers agree that they have difficulty demonstrating the impact of their function. So if a CCO wants to build a truly intelligence-driven comms function, what are the first 2 or 3 capabilities they need to put in place?
What a good question. So you might expect me to say data and analytics prowess, and all of those things I think are very important. But I think if they can exhibit themselves and also encourage and grow in their teams humanity and empathy and an understanding of the audience that they're looking to move to action, those would be really, really useful skills to have. Now, most people would expect, as I say, that an intelligence data-driven comms function, you need to invest in the data scientist first, and that you do need that. But if your data scientists, one, don't know what their role, one don't know not what they're being asked to justify, but if they don't know what the value is that they're being asked to measure in the context of the organization, then they'll probably not give you what you need. And I do think that this appreciation and understanding of your audience, internal audience, the C-suite, the board, the CFO, whoever it might be, it's really, really, really important to put yourself into their mind, their mindset, their shoes. Insight and empathy aren't the same thing, but that ability to mind travel and to anticipate what those you're seeking to influence need to hear in order to be able to make decisions it's a superpower. It's an absolute superpower. I've got a long-term collaborator, a guy called Ian Whitaker. He's a city analyst, specializes in the media and marketing world and big tech platforms as well. Twice won City AM's Analyst of the Year. Really smart guy, and he teaches and trains people in the act of speaking the language of the chief financial officer. And it's
Really?
not, yeah, it's not that we need to be speaking, pivoted Excel spreadsheets or Tableau, but I think for too long, comms has had a chip on its shoulder. Particularly, it's had a chip on its shoulder. It's not really taken measurement seriously. I mean, particularly earned media, particularly public relations. I call myself a reformed PR man, and I got so bored with the endless going round the track of one not measuring anything apart from outputs and not even thinking about out. If you're lucky, they get to outtakes. They very rarely get to outcomes and impact. So I mean, there are some things, I mean, like the government communications services model, like some of the templates that have been brought forward, like organizations like AMEC, the Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications, that really are impact-led, that have helped, but too few people adopt them. So there are templates and frameworks that one can use, but for me, the fundamental skills are empathy, humanity, and a respect for the data tolerance of the audience that you're seeking to move to action. And just say one more thing on that when we are knee deep in data that can prove our value, we suffer from what is known as the curse of knowledge. We know much more than those that we need to brief, and they don't want to know how we've got there, or they need to have the reassurance that we've done our due diligence. But we don't need to take them on that journey. That's almost vindictive and counterproductive. So avoid the curse of knowledge, and that again comes down to empathy and humanity and understanding.
But you would think for a chief communications officer, with their whole career is all about influencing the audience, they'd be able to do that pretty easily, keeping the audience in mind, audience first, and working back from there. So I know I'm making it sound simple, but
you are, and you're right, and I think it can be simple, but I think it's a classic case of cobbler's children's shoes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what does executive-ready evidence look like in communications then? The kind that actually influences decisions rather than just informs them.
Very, very, very fine challenge that you set. I mean, I think you need to keep the information, the evidence, the data simple yet smart. Clearly avoiding this curse of knowledge. I mean, finding and using genuinely relevant data. When I talk speaking the language of the CFO, actually, to what extent has it contributed to business success? Absolutely knowing your audience, understanding this data tolerance, understanding. We're looking to achieve this with our business. We are looking to motivate this group of customers, consumers, influencers, whoever it may be, to do this differently. Okay, where did we start? Where did we come in? How have we managed to change that? And really to anchor everything to the fundamental business goals of the business. And that comes back to speaking the language of the CFO, but unless we're having a material impact on business performance, then we're just giving vanity metrics. I mean, there's so little point in recording outputs. There might be big numbers, but big numbers don't necessarily mean that anyone has changed their decision. I mean, I think also there is this is something I'm getting a bit concerned about. It's not keeping me awake at night quite yet, but a bit concerned. Not yet, but is the subcontracting of large language models in particular, but kind of AI tools, not only to answer the questions, but actually to frame the questions. 2 years ago, everybody said we've got to have a prompt engineer, and now no one's saying that, because they're saying, well, you can just use your favorite LLM to ask the questions that you need to answer, and then so you say, if I wanted to know what impact I was having in my business, what questions would I ask? This is my business. Okay, so you are then given a set of questions. You then plug those in and you refine them, and then you get the answers and then you report them. For me, that's a bit like having a restaurant critic asking the office junior to go and eat the food, somebody else to write the review, and then somebody else to, and then the restaurant critic can write the it just kind of doesn't work. I think that kind of closeness and proximity to the business, that being embedded, but particularly aligning the evidence for the impact of communications, aligning that with the business objectives, the business goals, then you're more likely to stand a chance of success.
Mm. Do you see, Sam, in the work that you do you see a lot of disconnect between the work and business goals and strategy, or do you often see a gap?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, although sometimes our little consultancy can have a galvanic effect, and we make ourselves unnecessary. Let me give you an example, and I'll let them remain anonymous. For one of the world's biggest pharma businesses, who had a really good pandemic. They globally have a team of more than 100 insight and analytics professionals, many of whom have PhDs in analytics and statistics and modeling and the rest of it. Maybe about a third of whom do. And they exist, among other things. One of their chief roles is to serve the commercial teams in these fund businesses. And what do the commercial teams want to know? Have I got a blockbuster? How are we going to do when we launch in this country? What can you read the runes about what other competitors are doing in this space? And their approach to using evidence to persuade and to help with decision making was like Agatha Christie. And I say that with meaning, and I'll explain why. So it was like a whodunit. Or like Knives Out. Let's be less 1930s. Let's talk Knives Out. Yeah, and they're now. Listen, I watch those or read those with great pleasure, but I don't. It's like when I go to a magic show. I don't want to know how it's done. I just kind of along for the ride. You can't possibly work it out. I mean, let's be Agatha Christie and classic. We can spoil that one rather than Knives Out. Death on Nile. Everybody did it, right? Everybody did it, and or nobody did it, or somebody who appears in the last act did it, or. And that was their approach to serving their commercial teams. Their commercial teams would say, "We need to know what's going to happen with this drug, and this formulation is going to be launched next year." And they'd be this way, this way, this way, this way. We looked here, we found nothing. We looked here, we found nothing. And they were pulling their hair out. And I said, and they said, "Can you help us?" And I said, "Of course." They said, "Well, can you come and train us?" And about a week before I went, the boss of the team said, "And can you particularly change the relationship that we have with commercial teams, because they're cutting us short? They're not." So I said, "Yes, I said, give me an example." They gave me some examples, and it went here, 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 here. And I said, "Well, I'm going to get you to tell this murder mystery in a different way. I'm going to get you to do it in the how catch 'em structure." So there's the whodunit, right? There's the whodunit structure, which is you see everything, but you don't learn anything until the end of the. In the how catch 'em structure, which was popularized in the 1970s and 80s by the series Colombo, you see, as the audience, you see everything that happens before the first commercial break, right? And the pleasure is in seeing the mistakes that, in the case of Colombo, the bumbling detective, they kind of go down lots of different blind alleys, but you have this authorial position of God, right? You know everything that's happened. There's no dramatic irony. I mean, the dramatic irony is that the answer is staring them in the face and they can't see it. Now, I like both of those genres equally, but if you know everything to begin with, and then the pieces fall into place, as an audience member, I think it's very much more persuasive. Now, I said to my client, this global head of insight and analytics, I said, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to move from whodunit to how catch 'em." And he said, "Well, good luck." And at the end of a week, we had completely revolutionized the way they tell their stories. So, I mean, it wasn't that they had 4 slides, but rather than go on 162 slide, we looked here, here's the appendix of data, they said, on the second slide, here was the title. On the second slide, what we're going to do is we're going to tell you how big this drug is going to be in Latin America, whatever the big key business question was. Or we're going to show what the influence of this campaign is going to have or whatever it might be. It can be a communication, it can be a commercial. And they and the commercial teams, oh, really? And in order for me to do this, you need to then just look at 3 further arguments, data-driven arguments that show you how we've got there. Now, what that led to was a complete 180 switch from the inside analytics team being the anchor that dragged the commercial team down to them becoming their key commercial partners in the organization. And I haven't been back in through the door since, because they've changed the way they tell their stories and they know how to use data with data. But it was a lovely big and it's a great case study, because they flipped, all thanks to Colombo rather than Ryan Johnson. And
I love this story.
Yeah? No, it's great, and there are many businesses whose data and evidence and impact teams are taking not the Colombo approach, and it is amazing when the penny drops. It's like, okay, well, we just say the butler did it at the beginning, and then we.
Sorry to cut through some. Is that the curse? Is that coming back to the curse of knowledge again?
Entirely.
Right. Yeah.
Entirely. Yeah. I mean, the curse of knowledge. Steve Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, he wrote a lovely book not about words or rules or violence or all of the other topics he's written about. In 2014, he wrote a book called The Sense of Style: The Thinking Person's Guide to Writing in the 21st Century. And he defines in that book the curse of knowledge as the difficulty in imagining what it's like for someone else not to know something that you know, right? So we're briefed on something. We know that we've run this communications campaign. We need to measure it. And we say, well, we built a Facebook community and we got these likes and but did that move the needle? Did that address the key business question? And anyway, you're bogging me down. You're sort of wading through treacle to get to actually what the nugget might be. I've worked with a lot of market research businesses who to train them, who I would say as data storytellers often are among the worst offenders, but also among the quickest to learn. But they're among the worst offenders because they will say 66%, but 47%, but 33%, and they will throw lots at you and they will overwhelm you and you can't hold it in your mind. But also among the quickest to learn that actually the curse of knowledge is a curse. Google, I haven't had this confirmed by a Googler, but Google is said to have a rule that if you're doing, let's say, a 50-market cross-cultural comparison of corporate reputation, Google will allow you 3 slides. They'll allow you to have, this is what we've done, this is what we found, this is what you should do as a result. Now, if you're doing, corporate reputation moves very slowly, but I mean, sometimes it can shift quickly, but usually it moves slowly. And so those companies that are looking at corporate reputation and drivers of brand equity and so on, they can struggle to find something that's changed month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. And so I think that often leads them to say, to be afflicted by the curse, to hide behind the data. There's no excuse to hide behind data. Now, I think it would be much better to say, look, in the last quarter, although you've had 2 big tentpole launches and a product recall, actually there hasn't been the hit on your reputation so far. We may be seeing, but much better rather than to charts for charts' sake. There's no need for that. Now, that doesn't mean that you come back every quarter and say we haven't noticed any difference, because then you know what's the value. That might mean that you might look into your product offer, but the curse of knowledge, it really is a curse. And it's not dumbing down, it's not hiding your light under a bushel, it's not. What was great about that pharma story, the commercial versus insight analytics team, is that I said, I'm going to encourage you to have no more than 20 slides. I want you to have 4, but I'll let no more than 20, and then have an appendix break, and then you can have as many as you want. And what is great is that 6 months later, when I went back, I did get invited back. 6 months later, when I went back, they said, the amazing thing is we get into the appendix. The commercial leads say, yeah, but you said that about Latin America, but remember what we did when we had the European launch? I've got the data of that. Oh, could we have a look at that? And suddenly, and
Right.
I think with data storytelling, it is, it's about, data storytelling. It is storytelling. You want to engage people in a narrative, and you want them to become part of that narrative. And I think you can do that. It's not just about when you go from whodunit to how catch 'em, but if that really, the curse of knowledge is an empathy fail. Finding and using relevant data. I mean, if you use irrelevant data, that's an empathy fail. Empathy. It all comes back for me to empathy. The curse of knowledge is a curse, and do look out for it, because being super smart and doing all the analytics is great, but that's not what your leaders want to hear.
You mentioned earlier the key business question. You've reminded me of when we worked together, and that was the first thing that struck me. It's through the process that you were working on with the mutual client, also a global pharma. Um, you started with the key business question, so that already frames everything in the place that it needs to be. So that's a formula that's proven and works for you.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm working on I'm working now on a new standard of quality of decision making. Not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I think too often there is insufficient attention paid to the way that data shapes decision making. And I think that one of the big failings is that we're not specific, or indeed clear enough, right at the very beginning, to say what is the decision that we're going to be making. Too often it's either we need to run away from this, or it's status quo or bust, and there's not enough time spent on saying clearly. I mean, as I say, and as you say, what the key business question is, what the decision is that we're going to make. There's not enough attention put on what are the genuine live options. We don't assess the fitness of the evidence that we have. Often, far too often, nobody's accountable. I think decisions are made too often in the passive voice. By that, it has been decided that we're coming back to the office 3 days a week post-COVID, as many companies said in 2021, 22, 23, as if there'd been some kind of consultation, or as if there was a decision to be made. But I think there needs to be accountability. Decisions need to have individual names attached to them, and then are we going to review the impact of that decision and learn from it culturally? Given that you're Claritas and we're talking about clarity, you'll be delighted to know that I'm thinking about calling my new model of decision clarity clear.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah,
We love
yeah.
that.
I'm
We'll
sorry.
support that.
You'll probably say "see me in court," won't you? Yeah.
We're all friends, Sam. We're all friends.
Absolutely. No, but I do think that, I mean, and correctly, but the value of decisions is usually judged by the outcome. But what I'm hoping to achieve with this, what I certainly have found so far in working with clients, but also looking at decisions that we made historically, is that you can use a framework like this not only to judge what was the quality of that decision, because suddenly a world leader can decide they're going to go and bomb somebody else, or the oil prices, events can get in the way. Events get in the way. But also events can get in the way positively. So we decided we were going to launch a video streaming service, and it took off. There were events but actually the quality of the decisions that we make, I don't think is looked at enough. And the great thing about looking at these 5 different ways of judging decisions is that you can do a pre-mortem. You can say, do we have enough evidence? Is it the right evidence? Who's going to take accountability? Are we ever going to learn from this? And if you can answer yes to those convincingly, then you may have the basis for a decent decision.
This is fascinating, Sam. I've got a couple of questions that I do like to ask all of my guests. So this year marks 20 years of Claritas. Over that time, communications has evolved rapidly in scale, speed, and scrutiny. But as we know, some lessons endure. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self, what's the one piece of career advice you would give?
Okay, I'll give you a facetious one, and I'll give you a real one. But they're both true. So the genuine one is always be learning, always be curious, always ask another question. And you might think that that's inevitable. I would say that, but always looking to push the frontiers of your knowledge and experience, because kind of without that, be a shark, always be moving forward. I think they say sharks need to always be moving forward. But that curiosity can take you to extraordinary places, and you meet interesting people, and things happen. You get collaborations, but always be curious. You might think that you've got it cracked, but suddenly AI will come along and you haven't. That would be you always be curious, always be learning would be the first one. The facetious one would be don't have the last, don't be the last one at the party, don't have the last drink. I remember, and it's not just about consuming alcohol. And I'm not being kind of hair-shirted and saying, gosh, I feel I had a terrible drinking problem. But I remember being kind of a year or two post-graduation, being at a party, and there was always one guy who would leave, and he'd always leave quite early. And you'd say, well, why are you leaving? It's Friday evening. So, well, no, I've got to be up tomorrow because I'm doing this, and this with work. Yeah, but it's Saturday. And he's the person who's been a chief exec in 3 or 4 businesses on his merit. And I think there might be some connection between that. So maybe be curious and don't be last at the party, I would say. Probably.
And then you went into Adland, you went into agency world. So would have been hard to be the first to leave in that environment.
Yeah. But there's no crime in drinking water. I mean, I think cultures have changed enormously, and for the better, and peer pressures kind of works in different ways, I guess now. But yeah, curiosity.
I love that. Be a shark. I'm taking that one.
Be more shark.
So, and if you could put one idea, so we're looking forward now, if you could put one idea or piece of advice into a 20-year time capsule, what would it be, and why would that matter?
It would be one of two things that my dad was nearly 60 when I was born, but there were two things that he used to advise me that I have always found to be brilliant piece of advice over the last 20, 30 years, and I think will be brilliant advice. And one of they can both be initialisms. One would be "Let sleeping dogs lie," LSDL. Do not kind of poke a bear unnecessarily. Do not have to have the last word. Know when to not poke that sleeping bear. The other one would be read the question. And I know I'm all going back to question and asking smarter questions, but read the question. And that was the example he would give me before exams. He'd just write RTQ, and then if I would have an exam that I hadn't read the question, he would write RTFQ, and you can imagine the F stands for. And then but actually it then became a kind of mantra: read the question, read the question, and read the question again. But I think that's related to my point about curiosity, being curious. I think there were definitely times to my 20-year-old self, to my kind of about to graduate self, where I wasn't curious, where I was arrogant enough to think that I knew something. I started life as a classicist. I studied Latin and Greek at university first, and at school and at university first time round. And there's a line that Socrates, who was an awkward figure in many ways, but the 5th century BC philosopher Socrates is said to have said many, many times, which is whenever he was starting out a new line of intellectual inquiry, was all that I know is that I know nothing. And that intellectual humility Even if you are the world expert in pharma or automotive or whatever it might, media and marketing, even if you're the world expert, you're setting out a new line of inquiry, and if you just have that humility, that intellectual humility, to admit that you don't know what the answer is going to be, then you will almost certainly get something of interest and of value. If we always do what we've always done, we will always get what we've always got. And I'm just that it's the open-mindedness, I think, of being curious, reading the question as many times as you need, but admitting that we don't know what the answer is going to be.
This is wonderful. Be more shark. And I like the RTFQ version. I think it does. I'm using that one at the moment. Not that version of it, but with my teen son. So yeah, definitely appropriate. So lovely, really fantastic takeaways. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for taking part today and joining us. This has been truly insightful, exactly as I knew it would be, Sam.
Well, listen,
Didn't expect anything less.
Well, listen, thank you so much for having me, and very, very happy 20th birthday to ClariTaS, and congratulations. I'm looking forward to doing the next season in 20 years' time.
Oh, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Fantastic. Thank you so much again, Sam.
Great pleasure.
Along with the notion of be more shark and read the question, a key takeaway for me from today is that data alone doesn't create influence. The organizations that succeed will be those that turn data into insight, insight into narrative, and narrative into decisions. My thanks to Sam Knowles for joining me on Clarity Matters. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it or subscribe to our Clarity Matters YouTube channel for more. Thanks for listening.